Hello, and welcome to the next learning module on movie genres. In this tutorial, I will provide you with the definition of genres. We'll take a look at some of the major genres, and we'll look at some genre elements. Let's start with the definition of genre. A genre is defined as a group of films that share many characteristics and follow recognizable patterns. When it comes to genres, we have certain expectations about what our experience is going to be. So initially, we have expectations how a story will turn out and how the characters will change. There is a willful suspension of disbelief where we play along even though we know what's coming. Pleasure is derived from meeting or thwarting these expectations as we watch genre films. Now, it's important there's a certain amount of variation, but not too much. It's sort of like the Goldilocks syndrome, where we want it to be just right, where we know it's coming, but there is a little bit of surprise. Let's take a look at some of the major American film genres. This list is certainly not exhaustive, but it does encompass many of the popular genre films out there. Let's take a look at the different elements that go into making a genre. These are the things that we expect to see in a genre film. Starting with formulas. So a formula is simply a familiar story type. We look for familiar settings, stock characters, certain conventions, which are familiar bits of action, and we'll take a look at some of those later in this tutorial. Certain themes, which are familiar central ideas common to a genre, and icons, which are familiar symbols or images that come from a particular genre. Now, film genres do not remain static. They must change in order to avoid being stale. So we're going to look at genre evolution. So genre evolution is defined as the gradual but steady production of cinematic elements that establish stock characters, familiar plots, and conflicts that producers successfully repeat and audiences expect. Stages in the genre evolution include the experimental, where producers try new film conventions. Some of these remain and others are discarded. Then it moves on to the classical, where the conventions reach equilibrium and are mutually understood by audiences and artists. Refinement occurs when there is embellishment and new experimentations of conventions and stories in these genres. And then there is the Baroque stage, where the films are reflexive and sharp revisions of conventions, often delving into the area of parody. Let's take a look at the horror genre specifically, which is a very popular genre worldwide, and there are many different versions of the horror film genre. So horror films are defined as films that involve elements of physical or psychological terror and may explore dark themes, supernatural occurrences, or violent acts. It has its origins in Gothic literature and folktales. Let's take a look at some of the common horror film themes, starting with the fear of the unknown. There's also isolation and alienation, loss of control, psychological trauma, existential dread, fear of mortality, and loss and grief. Some of the common horror film settings include haunted houses, isolated cabins, cemeteries, abandoned buildings, dark forests, hospitals and asylums, and underground bunkers. Let's now take a look at some of the common horror film characters, starting with the final girl. Then there is the monster and villain, the believer, the skeptic, the reluctant hero, and the useless authority, who's a character like a sheriff or other authority figure who may not be helpful or knowledgeable. Some of the common horror film conventions or bits of action that we're familiar with include the jump scare, which are sudden, unexpected visual or sounds meant to startle the audience. There's the pathetic fallacy, where using the weather to reflect the emotional state of characters or the setting. Claustrophobia is involved with this, which creates a feeling of confinement and isolation. There's the monster unreasonableness, where the monster cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. Now, the camera work involves things like point of view shots, close-ups, and unusual angles are usually employed to create a sense of distress and tension. Low-key lighting with dark and shadowed areas creates a sense of mystery and danger in many horror films. Some common sounds that are used in horror films include ominous music, high-pitched sounds, screams, footsteps and creaking doors. All of these are used to heighten the suspense and alarm in a particular scene. Let's now examine the difference between the body horror film and the intellectual horror film. We'll start with the body horror film. So, body horror films feature the grotesque and psychologically disturbing physical transformations and alterations of the human body or other creatures. There's a focus on graphic and disturbing depictions of bodily changes, mutilations, or degradations. And these often explore themes of decay, disease, deformity, parasitism, mutation, or mutilation. An example of a body horror film is David Cronenberg's The Fly. In this film, we witness the gradual transformation of the scientist Seth Brundle into the grotesque creature. Let's now take a look at the intellectual horror film. Intellectual horror films concentrate on the psychological fear, often exploring philosophical or societal themes through the lens of horror rather than emphasizing the visceral and the physical. There's a focus on psychological fear, often grounded in artistic realism, and may use plot twists to build suspense. A classic example of an intellectual horror film is William Friedkin's The Exorcist from 1973. In this film, we witness a young child possessed by a demon, and two priests try to exorcise that demon, which results in an epic battle between good and evil. This concludes the movie genre tutorial video. It's now time for you to take the short film clip viewing assignment.